Sweet Girl starring Aquaman and Dora was kind of long. So this movie was okay, I guess. It tried to be a little bit too clever for my taste with the twist, but I enjoyed the twist, don't get me wrong, even though you kind of figure that out early on, but the movie goes out of its way to not deliberately tell you that Jason Momoa died, but that something else, that he survived, right? So this movie's basically, it starts off as a tearjerker, and for the first 10 minutes of this movie, I could honestly say that I was I almost shed a tear. It's never fun when you're dealing with cancer, and if anybody's had to go through that experience, you know how emotionally draining that is, not only on the individual with cancer, but also on the family. And when you see the reaction of Jason Momoa, and his daughter in this movie, it just hits you in the feels. And I couldn't, Jason Momoa, for that first part where his wife succumbs to the cancer and he has to just go away. He doesn't want anyone to see him because he has to have that, he has to be that dad. He has to be the Rock, if you will. And he just finally gets into an empty spot and he breaks down. And you could see from his facial expressions just how hurt he was. So for him, the actor, to put himself in that space, to be able to react the way he did, hats off to him. He did such a great job. But those first 5-10 minutes of the movie, that was probably the best part of this movie. How good his performance was in just that moment when he loses his wife, and he kind of just succumbs to his feelings. And you can relate if you've ever been in that experience, not only with the cancer, if you ever just had to have that kind of emotional, just that kind of emotional, whether it be a breakup, whether it be a move, whether it be cancer or some terminal disease, you will definitely almost shed a tear just like I did. So hats off to Jason Momoa for such a great performance in that part. But just since I'm in the performance part, it was good performance throughout. I thought Dora did a great part playing Jason Momoa's or Aquaman's daughter. And spoiler warning, a little bit late if with the spoiler warning, but if you haven't seen this movie, go ahead and go watch the movie, because I will be talking spoilerish things about this movie. So it starts off with Jason Momoa. Obviously, I said his wife has cancer, and they're really hopeful that they're going to have this experimental drug that a company is making, but then all of a sudden it gets recalled, and the treatment's no longer ready for his wife. Then, like I said earlier, his wife succumbs to the cancer, and he goes crazy. And sometime after that, like 6 months pass by from the moment that she dies. Even though the pharmaceutical person, the one that's developing the medicine or the treatment for the cancer, is on like a news talk show, and Aquaman calls up and says, why did you take it off? And I'm gonna find you and I'm gonna kill you and this and this and that on there, right? So you're like, well, that was dumb. They're gonna think of him. They're gonna look for him, because he was really hurt that his wife died over the cancer, over this treatment that this company was going to provide. And he was very hopeful. And ultimately, his anger got in there. So some time passes by, like 6 months. And, Jason Momoa's trying to deal with being a father and, a single father now, or a widower, or I don't know. Yeah, widower. And raising his daughter. And there's a lot of parallels in this movie from how they move. And like I said earlier, the movie tries to make you not, like, it does the switcheroo on you. Like, yeah, you look, it's Jason Momoa doing all this stuff. So like 6 months later come by, or a few months later, and then there's like a tip, right? Some guy wants to meet, Aquaman, and says, hey, I could break this story wide open. I know, you miss your wife, and there's some powerful people that could go to jail because they prevented the medicine. So he becomes intrigued, and he goes after, or he goes to this meeting, right? They set up a meeting because he wants to use, Jason Momoa's testimony or experience to try to, take this company down. And Dora follows her, and then, a scuffle happens where Aquaman gets stabbed in his stomach. And at that moment, at least I knew, I'm like, did he just die? Because they have a close up to Jason Momoa's hand, because he gets stabbed. There's like an altercation, and his daughter tries to help him and whatnot, but his hand falls down, and for that split second, you're like, oh shit, did he die? And then the parallel happens again, where before, when his daughter died, the first instance, you go to Jason Momoa and he's like fighting and punching this punching bag. So then after this first one, we see his daughter doing the same thing, like practicing for like MMA and stuff like that, and just having a lot of aggression that she's dealing with. And she wakes up in her, after this whole, she's practicing, but she doesn't release the hold. And then she's lying down, and she wakes up and she's looking at the window. And then you see Jason Momoa's reaction. So the movie tries to fake it out like, hey, he's still alive. And you're like, oh, what the hell? I could have sworn that he died at that when he was stabbed earlier on, but he doesn't. And then from this moment on, the movie wants to make it known that it's Aquaman doing all this stuff. He's the one trying to correct the wrong, and he's killing people, and he's doing all this, revenge. And the movie wants to make you feel like, hey, you know what? If you were in this position, you lost your wife or your husband or your son or your daughter or your father or your mother through some kind of greed, because big pharma and government get in the way. They go out of their way to make you, try to sympathize with him, and put the emphasis on that the daughter is just an innocent person, even though it does drop hints. And it's commendable, as far as the emotion that Jason Momoa is portraying, as far as like what you would do, or if you were in that situation where it kind of takes you for a different kind of side too, because he goes around killing, or at least towards the end we find out who the real killer was. But it kind of lets you feel like, hey, he's going around doing all this stuff, and just like revenge is not the answer, is the first thing that pops into your head. And you're like, wow, because you think that he's alive, right? And you're like, look at what you're doing. You now entered, and you're gonna leave your daughter behind, and you're not thinking straight. And at least for me, I was like, man, this is dumb. Like, he's just not even thinking about his daughter. Which, again, when the twist happens, you're like, I should have seen this coming, even though I did see it coming. But I'll give it up to the movie. It does a great job saying, hey, you saw this, but look at this other hand over here. Look at what's going on, and don't focus on what you thought you saw, because it's not correct. And like I said earlier, something happened, but the movie just tries to hide it so much. Then towards the end, it starts off with a scene where he's on top of something and he jumps off. So we're back at that first scene. And then, the detective that's working on it kind of tells her like, hey, what's your name? And earlier in the movie, she calls for help, the daughter does, and she's saying, oh, my dad's doing this stuff, like, what's your name, and whatnot. And towards the end of the movie, we find out that it was Dora all along that was committing all these revenge tactics. Then it leads to a whole different type of stuff, because she beat up two buff ass dudes bigger than her, and you're kind of just like, and you're like, it kind of makes sense, because if Jason Momoa, he's a big dude, and everyone that he fights in this movie is a lot smaller than him. And through the whole movie, where I'm like, man, this is so unrealistic, because Jason Momoa will kick all. He's like huge. He's a huge actor. He's a huge dude, and it's not believable. But then you realize that it's just the daughter, and she's going through this depression in her head where she is outside of herself, saying that her daughter, that it's her father, just because he misses her dad so much. And she's kind of going through a little bit of a psychotic episode, if you will. And yeah, so at the end, she goes up to the senator, makes the senator confess, kind of clears her name, kind of, and her family. She gets justice for her mom and for her dad and all that stuff, and she flies away. And that's basically the movie. I did a horrible job in breaking this movie down. You have to check it out because it's very intertwined and very, like I said, it's too much Lam Shyamalan, if you will. And I know I butchered his name. I used to say Lam Shyamalan just because I could never pronounce that dude's name. Kind of a twist, and it tries to be too clever, like I said earlier in the review. Besides that, I thought the pacing was really, really bad. It was so slow. I think it was like almost a 2-hour movie, an hour and 50 minutes. 20 minutes could have been knocked out of this movie, and you would have had a better movie. And I would have rated this movie a lot higher than what I did if the pacing wasn't that bad. I thought the script was very weak. Again, I thought this movie was trying to be too clever in what it was doing. And again, when you find out the twist, you are in awe, even though, again, you should basically know that in that first scene when Jason Momoa gets stabbed in the stomach in the subway, you should kind of see that coming. But hey, not everyone watches or maybe not everyone will see it that way, but you should. And then when you see that the twist happens, you're like, oh, that's why this and this and that. Even though it does let plot holes and some stuff that kind of then becomes unrealistic, just because of I don't think MMA suits you, or she could just practice for like 6 months and then be that proficient where she's beating up men that almost 2 or 3 times her body weight. So, but anyways, I gave this movie a C rating. There was way too many flaws in it for me to give it anything higher. Like I said, the pacing, I thought the acting was great, on the actors, and that kind of saved the movie. If it wasn't for Jason Momoa, Aquaman, or Dora, I would not have cared for this movie. I would have been like, this was a snore fest, and I would have been like, I probably would have gave it a D+. But the fact that they're acting for both of them was really good, and I thought for the most part, even the extras or the B-line actors were pretty good. But I just thought, like I said, it was bad pacing, a weak script, and it just tried to be too clever. My opinion, of course. But anyways, those are just my thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. And like always, that's a wrap.